Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. The mysterious new student. So, this is biology, huh? Mike Newton's voice rang out across the classroom, echoing off the sterile walls as he slid into the empty seat beside Bella. The scent of formaldehyde and freshly cut onions wafted through the air, mingling with the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Bella Swan, a new student at Forks High School, had been trying to stay inconspicuous, but it seemed her efforts were in vain. Bella's gaze darted around the room, her eyes locking onto the stack of textbooks in front of her before quickly retreating. She fidgeted with her hands, her fingers drumming a staccato rhythm on the desktop as she tried to focus on anything but Mike's chatter. Her cheeks flushed slightly as she became aware of her classmates' curious stares. "Yeah, it's not too bad," Bella replied, her voice neutral, though her eyes betrayed a hint of unease. Across the room, Edward Cullen's golden eyes watched her intently, his gaze piercing through the din of conversation. He sat ramrod straight, his shoulders squared, exuding an aura of quiet confidence. As Mr. Banner entered the room, the students settled into an uneasy silence. "Bella Swan, I believe you're new here. Please come up and take the empty seat over here." He gestured to a lone desk next to Edward. Bella's heart sank as she reluctantly gathered her belongings and made her way to the indicated seat, feeling the weight of her classmates' stares. As she passed Edward, she caught a brief glimpse of his eyes, which seemed to hold a mixture of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite identify. His face remained impassive, yet his gaze lingered on hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Bella sat down, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. She placed her books on the desk and kept her eyes fixed on them, not wanting to draw any more attention to herself. "So you're the new girl," Edward murmured, his voice low and velvet-like. "I'm Edward Cullen." Bella looked up, startled by his sudden proximity and the intensity in his gaze. "I'm Bella Swan," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward offered a slight smile, his eyes never leaving her face. "I couldn't help but notice you seem a bit uncomfortable. Is everything okay?" Bella hesitated, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to draw attention to her awkwardness, but she also felt a strange sense of comfort in Edward's concern. "I'm fine, just adjusting to a new school," she finally said, offering a small smile in return. As the class progressed, Bella found herself stealing glances at Edward. He seemed completely engrossed in the lesson, his eyes focused on the teacher, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he was aware of her every move. It was unnerving, yet intriguing at the same time. The bell signaling the end of class startled Bella, and she quickly gathered her things, eager to escape the intense atmosphere. As she stood to leave, Edward spoke again, his voice soft and hesitant. "Bella, wait." Bella paused, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned to face him, her eyes questioning. "I was wondering if you'd like to join me for lunch tomorrow," Edward said, his eyes searching hers. "I usually sit with my family, but you're welcome to join us." Bella felt a rush of conflicting emotions. On one hand, she was curious about Edward and wanted to get to know him better. On the other hand, she was wary of getting too involved with someone who seemed to exude an air of mystery and danger. Sure," she said finally, her voice wavering slightly. "I'd like that." As Bella turned to leave, she felt Edward's eyes on her. Uncovering secrets. Edward Cullen's eyes followed Bella Swan as she navigated the crowded hallway, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if anticipating rejection. He couldn't help but notice the faint crease between her eyebrows, a subtle sign of strain that only he seemed to detect. As they sat together in class, Edward found himself drawn to Bella's mysterious personality. Her shyness and discomfort in social situations were palpable, and he sensed her expectation of rejection from her classmate. He detected the faint scent of fear emanating from her, mixed with a hint of curiosity. Edward's initial fascination with Bella's scent had turned into a deeper curiosity about her thoughts and feelings. He was determined to uncover her secrets. "Why do you always sit alone at lunch?" Edward asked. Bella shrugged, her eyes darting away from his. "I don't really know anyone here." Edward's gaze lingered on her face, searching for any signs of deception. But Bella's expression remained open and honest, piquing his interest further. "I think you're wrong," Edward said, his voice low and smooth. "You do know someone here. Me." Bella's eyes snapped back to his, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Edward's heart raced as he realized he had revealed more than he intended. "What do you mean?" Bella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward smiled, trying to cover his mistake. "Just that we have biology class together. That makes us acquaintances, doesn't it?" Bella nodded slowly. As the days passed, Edward found himself observing Bella more closely, analyzing her interactions with her classmates, and detecting the subtle signs of strain on her face. He began to piece together a puzzle of her past and motivations, sensing that there was more to this quiet, unassuming girl than met the eye. But Edward's vampiric nature continued to cloud his judgment, making him struggle with conflicting emotions. He was torn between his desire to maintain his facade and his growing fascination with Bella. As he walked out of class alongside her, he couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden beneath her reserved exterior. Each encounter with her revealed layers of complexity that defied the simplicity of his existence. The intensity of his craving in his throat was matched only by his yearning to understand the enigma that was Bella Swan. With every shared glance and word, Edward felt himself pulled deeper into a world of emotion and humanity that he had long thought was beyond his reach. As he pondered over the quiet strength she possessed, Edward began to realize that Bella might just be the one to bridge the chasm between his eternal night and her mortal day. The dilemma of desire. Edward's eyes lingered on Bella, his gaze drawn to her like a magnet. He couldn't help but be fascinated by the mysterious new student who had captured his attention. As he sat beside her in biology class, he found himself struggling to focus on the lesson, his mind wandering to the enigmatic girl beside him. Bella shrugged, her eyes never leaving the textbook in front of her. "I don't know. I just prefer it, I guess." Edward's curiosity was piqued. What was it about this girl that made her so different from everyone else? He couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. As the days went by, Edward found himself growing more and more attracted to Bella. But with every passing moment, he was reminded of the danger he posed to her. His vampire instincts were strong, and he knew that if he wasn't careful, he could lose control and harm her. Edward found himself in the empty school library, the silence a stark contrast to the turmoil in his heart. He leaned against a bookshelf, closing his eyes as he tried to steady his breathing. The scent of old books was a welcome distraction from the intoxicating aroma that was uniquely Bella. In the quiet, Edward could hear the distant laughter and chatter of students, a reminder of the life he once knew. A life that now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the presence of the girl who had unwittingly become the center of his world. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, but Edward remained motionless, lost in thought. It was then that he heard her voice, soft and hesitant. "Edward?" Bella stood at the entrance of the library, her eyes searching for him. "Are you okay?" Edward straightened up, his expression guarded. "I'm fine, Bella. Just needed a moment to think." Bella walked towards him, her steps slow and deliberate. "You're trying to protect me, aren't you?" she said softly. Edward's resolve wavered as he looked into Bella's eyes, a myriad of emotions reflected in his own. "Bella," he began, his voice a whisper, "there are things about me you wouldn't understand." Bella stepped closer, her determination evident. "Then help me understand," she implored. Edward's heart ached with the weight of his secret, knowing that revealing the truth could change everything. A bond forms. The classroom was dim, the only light coming from the flickering images of the movie projected on the screen. Edward sat rigidly, his eyes never leaving Bella, who was completely engrossed in the film. He could hear every heartbeat, every breath she took, and it was both a melody and a torment to his senses. Suddenly, Bella's hand brushed against his in the darkness. It was accidental, a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt through Edward's body like an electric shock. He wanted to grasp her hand, to feel the warmth of her skin against his cold, immortal one, but he restrained himself. The danger was too great. Edward watched her intently, sensing her discomfort. "You don't look fine. You're pale, even for you." Bella tried to laugh it off, but then her eyes rolled back and she slumped in her seat. Panic surged through Edward as he caught her before she could hit the floor. The class erupted into chaos, but Edward barely noticed. He lifted Bella effortlessly, cradling her in his arms as he rushed out of the classroom. Mike Newton protested, but Edward ignored him, his protective instincts in full control. As Mrs. Hammond bustled around checking Bella's vitals, Edward found himself stealing glances at her. Her eyes sparkled with a quiet determination, and he sensed a depth to her that he couldn't quite fathom. The mystery surrounding her only drew him in further, like a moth to flame. Edward's lips curved into a wry smile. He knew Mike didn't trust him, and rightly so. He couldn't resist the pull of her presence, even as he knew it was madness to indulge in such proximity. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to care. For the first time in centuries, he felt alive. A brother's concern. Edward sat in the living room, staring at the floor as he tried to make sense of his feelings for Bella. He was torn between his desire to be with her and his fear of putting her in danger. Suddenly, Emmett walked in. "Hey, Edward. What's going on?" Emmett asked. "Just trying to figure some things out," Edward replied, his voice low. Emmett snorted. "You mean trying to figure out how to stay away from Bella without losing your mind?" "How did you know?" Edward looked at him, surprised. "I can read you like a book, brother," Emmett said with a grin. "You're stuck on her and it's driving you crazy." Edward sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what to do, Emmett. I want to be with her, but I'm scared of what might happen." Emmett's expression softened. "I think I might have a solution." "What is it?" Edward was curious. "We could turn her into a vampire," Emmett suggested. Edward was taken aback. "What? No way, Emmett." "Why not? It would solve all your problems. You could be together without worrying about her safety." Edward shook his head. "You don't understand, Emmett. That's not a solution. It's a curse. And besides, I don't think she'd want that." "Are you sure about that?" "She seems pretty taken with you, Edward. And think about it. She'd be safe from all the dangers out there. You could protect her forever." Edward hesitated, tempted by the idea despite himself. But then he remembered Bella's words, her passion for life, and her determination to stay human. "No, Emmett," he said firmly. "I won't do it. I won't take away her humanity just to ease my own fears." Emmett nodded, though his expression was disappointed. "Okay, brother. But just remember, I'm only trying to help." Edward stood up, pacing across the room as he tried to process his thoughts. He knew Emmett was trying to help, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that turning Bella into a vampire was not the right solution. "Emmett, I appreciate your concern, but we need to think of other ways to keep Bella safe," Edward said, turning back to his brother. Emmett shrugged. "Like what? You're already doing everything you can to protect her. What else can you do?" Edward stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing as he thought. I don't know yet, but I'll figure something out. I just need some time to think. Emmett nodded. All right, brother, take all the time you need. But just remember, I'm here for you, no matter what. Edward smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude towards his brother. Thanks, Emmett. That means a lot to me. As Emmett left the room, Edward couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He knew that keeping Bella safe was going to be a challenge, but he was determined to find a way to do it without taking away her humanity. Following instincts. The streets of Port Angelos were bustling with the early evening crowd as Bella wandered through the unfamiliar lanes. She had lost track of time and her friends, her mind preoccupied with the enigmatic Edward Cullen. His absence at school that day had left her with a strange sense of emptiness, and the city's distractions couldn't fill the void. As she turned a corner, a chill ran down her spine, a feeling of being watched creeping over her. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. It was then she heard footsteps echoing her own, a silent but assuring presence that she instinctively knew belonged to Edward. Why are you following me? Bella's voice trembled slightly as she confronted him in a dimly lit alley. Edward emerged from the shadows, his eyes reflecting the faint light, revealing a turmoil of emotions. There's something about you that's different, and it's not safe for you here, not alone. Bella's eyes searched his, finding a sincerity that both scared and comforted her. I can take care of myself, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Edward stepped closer. But there are things that lurk in the shadows, things you can't even imagine, and I can't let you face them alone. His gaze was intense, almost burning with a fierce protectiveness that made Bella's breath catch in her throat. Edward took her hand, his touch cold but strangely comforting. I won't let anything happen to you, he said, his voice firm with resolve. Bella felt a mix of fear and fascination. What kind of things? She asked, her curiosity piqued despite her trepidation. Edward hesitated, his expression pained. It's better if you don't know. The less you know, the safer you'll be, he said, looking away as if hiding a dark secret. I'm not afraid of the truth, Edward, Bella insisted, her determination shining through. He looked back at her, his eyes softening. And that's what terrifies me the most. Edward's gaze lingered on hers, his eyes searching for something he wasn't sure he'd find. Bella's determination was admirable, but it was also a liability. He knew he had to tread carefully, to find a balance between revealing the truth and keeping her safe. The silence between them grew thick, heavy with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Finally, Edward spoke, his voice low and cautious. Let me take you home, Bella. It's not safe for you to be out alone at night. Internal conflict. Edward paced the length of his room, the moon casting a pale glow through the window. The night was silent, but his mind was a cacophony of thoughts and emotions. Bella's face haunted him, her deep brown eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and fascination. He had never met a human like her, one who seemed to see right through him, beyond the monster he believed himself to be. He remembered the way she leaned towards him, her scent overwhelming his senses, a sweet and dangerous temptation. It was a constant battle, a tug-of-war between his instincts and his conscience. He wanted to protect her, to keep her safe from the world and from himself, yet he also yearned to be close to her, to feel the warmth of her skin against his cold touch. As he dwelled on these conflicting desires, the memory of her fainting in the school hallway flashed in his mind. He had caught her just in time, the concern in his voice betraying his usual calm demeanor. Are you all right, Bella? He had asked, his arms securely around her. I'm fine, Edward, she had replied, her voice a soft whisper. I just need a moment. That moment, her vulnerability in his arms, had solidified his resolve to be her steadfast guardian. In the quiet of his room, Edward clenched his fists, the marble skin stretching taut over his knuckles. The internal battle raged on, A war between the monster and the man he desperately wanted to be for Bella. Each memory of her trustful gaze was a reminder of the man he could become. "Edward, why do you push me away?" Bella's voice echoed in his memory, her words laced with pain and confusion. "Because I'm dangerous to you, Bella," he whispered, his voice pained. "I could never forgive myself if I hurt you." Yet, even as he spoke those words, he knew they were not enough to deter her. In her eyes he saw a reflection of his own conflicted soul, a soul that longed for redemption and a chance at love. The approaching dawn brought with it a sense of urgency. Edward knew he could no longer deny the truth of his feelings or the depth of his connection with Bella. The internal battle he had been waging was one he knew he could not win. He was irrevocably drawn to her, and the only path forward was to confront his fears head-on. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, Edward made his way towards Bella, his steps purposeful and determined. He would lay bare his soul, reveal the darkness within, and let her see the true monster he believed himself to be. It was a risk, but one he was willing to take for the chance to be with her. In that moment, Edward Cullen, the enigmatic and tortured vampire, decided that his love for Bella was worth challenging his own nature. He would fight against the shadows that dwelled within him, embracing the possibility of a future where he could be the hero in her eyes, even if it meant facing his deepest fears. The fate of love. I climbed into the tree, settling into my usual spot where I could observe Bella unnoticed. The sun illuminated the backyard with a warm glow as Bella stepped out of the house, book and blanket in hand. I couldn't help but smile as she settled into her favorite reading spot. Her hair danced gently in the breeze as she immersed herself in her book, and I was captivated by the sunlight's interplay with her hair, accentuating its subtle shades of brown and red. The surrounding houses faded into the background as my gaze remained fixed on Bella, my heart racing. After a while, I decided to join her and seek answers to the questions swirling in my mind about our encounter the previous night. I took a steadying breath and called out to her. "Bella?" She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, we simply held each other's gaze, the tension between us palpable. "What are you doing up there?" she asked, a hint of amusement lacing her voice. I climbed down from the tree, my movements graceful and effortless. "I wanted to talk to you," I replied, opting for honesty. Bella's expression was a mix of curiosity and wariness as I approached, but she didn't flinch or move away. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly. I sat beside her on the blanket, gathering my thoughts. "Last night, how did you feel when we were together?" I asked, my voice steady. "Did you sense anything unusual?" Bella's eyes narrowed slightly in concentration. "I felt different," she said slowly. "It's like there was an unspoken connection between us that I can't explain." Her words sent a surge of relief and something akin to joy through me. She had felt it too, this inexplicable bond that defied logic. Bella's fingers toyed with the edges of her book as she continued. "I don't know how to describe it, but it's like I've known you forever. And yet there's still so much mystery surrounding you." I reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, my thumb grazing her cheek. Our eyes locked, and in that moment I knew I couldn't deny what was between us, regardless of the danger it posed. As the sun began its descent, our conversation deepened, leading to confessions and a tentative understanding. Despite the chaos that seemed to follow us, I knew I was exactly where I wanted to be. Bella was my destiny, and I was hers. A love story woven by fate, defying all odds and challenges that lay ahead.